I tried to escape the rain in a rundown cabin. It wasn't as abandoned as I thought. I'm an avid hiker, and I go after this hobby whenever I can. Despite knowing it could be safer, I don't like taking people with me. I make up for it by telling my friends where I'm headed and when to expect me to come back, though. This way, if anything should happen to me and I'm unable to call for help, there's always going to be someone who knows that I'm gone and where to look for me. Not that I often go anywhere that's particularly dangerous. I mostly just drive out to this hilly stretch of woodland that's about an hour away from where I live. There are a lot of signposted trails there, and even though I've taken all of them at least once before, I don't mind doing it again. When this happened, I was hiking up a longer path. All the trails go around the forest in a loop, so you'll come back right out from where you started from. The one I chose involves a pretty steep ascent, so it's likely more challenging than some of the others. It made me sweat a good deal, but since it wasn't my first time, I was doing just fine, until it started raining. The weather forecast had predicted nothing but a cloudy sky and mild temperatures, so this was completely out of the blue. It was a kind of strong rain too. Before long, the water was whipping at my face and coming down hard. I needed to get myself somewhere dry, or it'd start kneading me like dough. Of course I hadn't brought an umbrella, so I ended up running into the woods for cover. For a while, I crouched down under a big tree, and did shield me from the rain for a few minutes. I figured I could just wait it out, but then there was this loud cracking noise right behind me, and I turned just in time to watch a huge branch break off another tree and crash down below. Without me noticing, the wind had picked up and was now causing the bushes and treetops to shudder violently. I didn't want a branch like that coming down on me, so I hastily rushed back onto the trail. With how far I'd walked already, my only option was to keep walking until I'd come back out. Pressing on was difficult. The rain was icy and made me shiver even through my jacket. Then, all of a sudden, I remembered there was an old abandoned cabin off to the side, a little way up the trail. Hopeful once more, I began to jog, shielding my eyes from the falling water with my hands as I looked around trying to locate the small wooden building. Finally, I spotted the structure in the distance and started my way up to it. Praying that it wasn't locked, I rattled on the doorknob. The door swung open with an obedient creak, and I staggered inside before slamming it shut behind me. I dropped my backpack before peeling off my wet jacket and desperately rubbing my arms to warm them up. It was surprisingly warm inside the cabin, and pleasantly dry. It smelt like old wood, nothing I wouldn't be able to ignore. I was beyond relieved that the door had been open. Looking around, I took in my surroundings. There wasn't a lot of furniture left inside. I was standing at what must have been the living room at some point, judging from the sad-looking ragged couch that stood in the middle of it. There was a tiny open kitchen in the back, and also a staircase that probably led down to the basement, but I didn't feel like checking it out. There was a good chance that the steps would break down as soon as I'd put any weight onto them. Turning my attention to the windows, I found that one of them was broken, but had been pieced back together with duct tape. I tentatively gave it a poke with the tip of my finger, which it withstood. I hoped it would outlast the storm. The sound of thunder came rolling down from outside. I flinched as to how loud it was. I really had been lucky to make it inside the cabin in time. I was hesitant to get comfortable on the couch for fear of the tiny life forms that might have taken up residence inside of it over time, but it still beat sitting on the floor. So I sank down on the saggy cushions and took out my cell phone. Of course I had no reception whatsoever. At least I had some offline games to play while I was waiting for the storm to die down. After half an hour, I realized that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. I would have to go easy on the battery if I wanted to have some left by the time I got out of there. So I set aside my phone and started looking through my backpack for something else to keep myself busy with. I found a worn novel I crammed in there and forgotten about ages ago, so I started reading. I still had a bunch of snacks and water, so I ate and drank until my stomach felt pleasantly full. The wind was howling outside and I kept hearing thunder clapping. The sky was growing darker too. I noticed that it was getting harder to read with how little light was finding its way into the windows. This concerned me a bit, and I wondered how long exactly I would end up stuck in the cabin. Things were looking pretty grim out there, and I wasn't too keen on spending the night in a place like this, even though it did kind of feel adventurous. I continued to read for as long as what remained of the light's day allowed me, but that was hardly another hour. The hut looked spooky in the darkness. It wasn't exactly pitch black, but enough to make me uneasy. The only thing to illuminate the living room was the occasional flash of lightning from outside. I moved over on the couch so I could watch the storm through one of the windows. Thunder rolled once again, and then all of a sudden, a male voice cut through the silence left in its wake. 7, 6, 11, 9, and 20 mile today. I jolted upright for a second. My head had gone completely empty. Then I glanced around frantically before realizing that nobody had actually spoken to me. The voice was deep and eerily resonant, but it had a crackly undertone to it. It was a recording, but my relief upon realizing this was short-lived. There was a strange recording playing somewhere nearby, somewhere close to me. Somebody had just turned it on. 4, 11, 17, 32, the day before. The recording stopped. It had only been playing for a mere second, but I could tell that it was coming from downstairs, from the basement. The abrupt way that it had turned off made me think that whoever was down there had only turned it on by accident. They'd never want me to find out that I wasn't alone. It was only then that I realized I was sitting on the couch, frozen in place like a statue, staring at the basement entrance. I instantly jumped to my feet and picked up my jacket, struggling to put it on, while at the same time trying to shove my belongings back into my backpack. I had to get out of there. I didn't care about the rain or the lightning or the falling branches anymore. I just needed to get out. Then I heard footsteps. They were hasty, fast, and they were moving up the stairs. Stifling a scream, I abandoned my backpack and simply burst through the door, sprinting out into the cold. Despite the darkness, I could see the trail ahead, just a small distance away from the cabin. I leapt towards it, and when I'd reach it, I kept on running as fast as my legs would carry me. I hurriedly patted down my jacket. I could feel my cell phone, wallet, and keys in my pockets, which immediately made me feel light with relief. There was also a can of pepper spray somewhere in there, which I figured was better than nothing, if, God forbid, anyone had been in that cabin would catch up to me. Thankfully, it never came to that. By some miracle, I found my way back to my car. I instantly locked it upon jumping inside. I was completely drenched and utterly exhausted. It took me ages to catch my breath. I sat in the car for about half an hour, shaking and crying, before finally managing to pull myself together. Realizing I shouldn't hang around, I started driving. I was way too tired to make it all the way back home, so I just stopped at this dingy little motel that's 50 minutes away from the hiking spot and got a room there for the night. I basically collapsed on the bed. I didn't know whether or not to call the police. I had some bad experiences with the local authorities before, so I decided not to. At least, not right away. It's a trust thing, I guess. What I did was call my brother and told him everything, asking him if he and I could go back to the place together to see what was up with it. He readily accepted, and we came up with the following plan. My brother, being a huge guy himself, would come pick me up in the morning with two or one of his friends, and we would return to the woods as a group so no one could try to mess with us. We'd go up to the cabin, retrieve my lost belongings, and take a good look at it, but I also had to promise him that if we were to find any evidence of something bad going on there, we'd immediately call the cops. He showed up in his truck the following day as promised with another man with him. We headed back to the hiking spot and made our way up the trail. The storm had left its impact on the woods quite clearly. Broken branches were scattered everywhere, and some of the young, thin, and more fragile trees had been knocked over completely, basically torn out at the roots. The cabin had endured. Its door was wide open when we reached it. We entered it one right after the other. I could tell the guys were just as nervous as I was. No doubt that they were taking what I'd told them quite seriously. Still, we were all prepared to defend ourselves if someone was to charge at us unexpectedly. My backpack wasn't in the upstairs room, which to me could only mean that somebody had moved it. When my brother said that we'd have to go down to the basement, I was understandably reluctant at first, but he reminded me that we had agreed on this earlier, so it was far too late for me to chicken out. Each stair had let out an agonized creak as we put our weight onto it, and I feared the rickety old things would really end up breaking down on me. My brother's friend stayed upstairs, so that he could get us out in case something would really happen, but to my surprise, it never did. Soon enough, we found ourselves in a room that was just as big as the living room. There was enough light falling in from upstairs for us to see everything, and what we saw was absolutely terrifying. First, there was a tape recorder, and it sat right in the middle of the floor like it had been propped up for us to find right away. My brother went up to it and turned it on. I flinched as I heard the same warped male voice start to speak. 7, 6, 11, 9, and 20 mile today. It sounded like just as eerie as before. My brother's friend suddenly called up to us from upstairs. "Is that Boots?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "That's Boots. It's the poem by Rudyard Kipling, I think. I don't know who did that reading, but it's creepy as hell. I've heard it used to simulate torture or something like, for Navy SEAL training, I don't know." By the way, it really was boots. That's why I don't feel the need to transcribe the recording here exactly, since you could just look it up. That was the first thing that gave us a really queasy feeling though. While the room was largely empty, a single cardboard box that had been pushed over to the wall stood out. My brother took a look inside without touching it. Then he waved me over. Upon bending down beside him, I checked it out. I found that it had several rolls of duct tape, a bunch of plastic bags, some cable binders, and a lot of small gardening tools, like a little hoe, secateurs, and a saw. We also found cleaning supplies in another corner of the room, right next to the 2 buckets with plastic lids on top. The second I opened one of them, a putrid smell came wafting out, strong enough to send me and my brother reeling backwards. I cursed and immediately covered my nose and mouth, hurriedly moving in again to shut the damn thing, but in my haste I knocked it over. We stumbled aside as vicious brown and red liquid spilled out onto the floor at our feet, feces and blood. Oh fuck, come on, we're getting out of here, my brother yelled, grabbing me by the wrist and starting to drag me back up to the stairs. At that very moment, however, something caught my eye out of the darkened corner of the room. Wait, I told him, pulling my hand out of his grasp and pointing at what I had just seen. It was my backpack, hung up on a nail jutting out of the wall. How had I not noticed it sooner? I had cautiously stepped over the pool of blood onto the floor to reach it, but eventually I grabbed it, and then leaped back over to my brother. We ran back up the stairs and left the cabin with our third companion, and as soon as we were back in the car, he called the police while I began rummaging through my backpack. Everything was how I'd left it. Nothing had been taken out. There was something else, though. I found it tucked between the pages of the book I'd been reading. It was this torn-off piece of paper with a brief note scrawled onto it. Just a few words, but enough to make my stomach turn.
Slippery little thing.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate all of you. I'll see y'all in the next video, and Merry Christmas. I linked all the resources down in the description if you guys want to see the footage or read the whole CreepyPasta story. That's also down below. So go ahead, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys.